Appreciate you, Kevin, for keeping us honest and making sure we do this every year. And for Khalid, who is always my lawful partner in crime on all of these. So I greatly appreciate it. And I think it's great because it brings a real world element to the course from the perspective of practitioners, real estate practitioners. So thank you, Khalid. Appreciate you as always. And we will start rolling now with a few disclaimers for today's class. First and foremost, this webinar is meant only to provide education and information on relevant topics facing the industry. This is not a substitute for legal advice. Since I represent the association, it would be a conflict if I were to represent all of you and give you all legal advice. So I am not doing that today. That's not what this webinar is. Another reminder is our antitrust policy that we've got at the association and which we follow religiously. What is that and what does it mean for you? We're going to talk about a lot of things today, but we are not going to talk about commission or compensation amounts. You will be escorted from the Zoom room if you drop something like that in the chat. The other thing we're not going to discuss is boycotting of any certain business practices. So if somebody wants to talk about how they do X, Y, Z in their business, and this is the only way to go, and there are other ways to be doing business, and you would be favoring a particular business model, we can't do that because that's boycotting. Why does this matter? Because you are all competitors in the same Zoom room talking about you'd be talking about those issues, which would be an antitrust violation. You are all competitors, even though you work together. I love real estate because it's a great industry, but it's also kind of weird because you are competitors working collaboratively every single day. So the antitrust red flags don't automatically go off, and that's okay because that's what we're here to do for you. All right. What are we going to talk about today that's different from what we have talked about in the past courses that we've done over the month? So first thing we're going to do is talk about the fair housing laws generally and protected classes and Section 8. We will talk about that as well in this context. We will also talk about how not to get sued for Section 8 violations, as well as everything else out there in the fair housing, under the fair housing umbrella. We see these cases all the time at the association because members, surely not you, reach out to us asking what to do because they have been sued. We are then going to share some resources with you. Kevin tipped you off that we have a new toolkit, the queen of toolkits. I love them. It's a checklist, tenant screening checklist that is updated. So stay tuned. That's coming later in the program. And last but not least, Q&A, some housekeeping on what to expect today. Put your questions in the chat, please. We will take them either as we go along or at the end. Do not come off mute to ask your question. Please put them in the chat. We will take them from the chat. After today's session, Kevin, if we can impose on you to send out the slides and the toolkit, that would be wonderful by email, so we can do that. And without further ado, and we are recording. And Kevin, will this be on Miami Realtors Live?
I don't have access to Miami Realtors Live, but it'll be on our YouTube channel.
You do? Oh, okay, YouTube. It'll be online in a video format. Where? YouTube.
YouTube.
Done. Okay. Okay, so first things first. Before I jump in, Khalid, you want to say anything else before I jump in? The disclaimers, the welcomes, the hellos?
No, not yet. I would rather see what you're saying and fill in there, but I'm just glad to be here. Thank you for trusting me with this role. Thank you, Kevin, for trusting my vision, and thank you. That's good.
All right. So first things first, like what is this all about? Why is this a thing? Why are we talking about fair housing and Section 8 in the same breath? What are the underpinnings of it? And we like to take a step back in this particular session to talk about the fair housing laws, because this is where it all stems from. And when we talk about fair housing laws, it's really important to remember that there are multiple layers of fair housing laws. I like to refer to it as a parfait. So you've got these different layers that are all separate layers, yet they all go together. And once you put that parfait together, there's no picking the granola out of the yogurt, right? So you've got this parfait, and There are federal laws, there are state laws, there are local rules, ordinances, regulations, and they all play together. And you have to abide by all of them. And we have a chart that will show you on the local protected classes, right? But in general, fair housing laws come in at different levels. So whichever state you're in, whichever county you're in, some cities have their own, and of course, the federal fair housing laws. All right. So what about the fair housing laws? What's in them, right? The thing that we're going to be talking about today is protected classes, right? How does a fair housing claim come about? Well, it is a person who is of a protected class bringing a claim, right? And protected classes are groups of people with a common characteristic who are legally protected from housing discrimination based on that characteristic. Again, you create these protected classes in federal, state, and local laws. We're going to talk about exactly what those protected classes are in a moment on the next slide, but just know that there are protected classes, right? So what about them? If you are in a protected class, if you are living in a place or applying to live somewhere, whatever practices or policies are in place by the owner or landlord or real estate agents, because you all have liability under these laws as well, those policies, procedures, behaviors, they cannot have a discriminatory effect. That is where liability, aka lawsuits, come in. And how does liability get triggered? Well, it's established under the Fair Housing Act or some state fair housing laws, or even some local ones, based on a particular practice's discriminatory effect. And it's really important to note here that intent does not matter, right? The road to where is paved with good intentions, and the intent does not matter. If there is a discriminatory impact or effect or a disparate impact, right? It doesn't even have to be discriminatory, a disparate impact, meaning a group of people who are a protected class, if the impact on them is different, even if you didn't mean for it to be so, you could still be liable. We'll talk about how that looks in a little bit, but often it comes up in the criminal records cases. Now, another hot topic we see. We've gone through what protected classes are, how there could be a discriminatory effect or a disparate impact. One of those protected classes that's created under local laws is source of income. And this is where Section 8 comes into play. Because Section 8, there is a voucher. If you have been with us earlier this month or in a former previous webinar, you know that if you are a Section 8 voucher user, recipient, then part of your rent is paid from the housing authority directly to your landlord. That's part of your income. That's part of your household income that has a monetary value. So source of income can also be something like Social Security, disability income, veteran benefits, widower benefits, right? And each municipality will have their own breakdown on exactly how income is defined. Some of them are like lawful income, right? So, if there's a side hustle that may or may not be entirely lawful, perhaps that is not included. Why you wouldn't want to take that income into consideration. There's that. But you don't get the source of income protections on some of it. But in general, just know that if there is income and it comes from a source like Section 8, Veterans Affairs, SSA, Social Security Administration, those types of things, right? Make sure that you know that in many municipalities, you cannot discriminate. You can't say, no, I'm not renting to you because you have a voucher. No, I'm not renting to you because you're a survivor of domestic violence and you have a specific voucher for that. Can't do that. Khalid, jump in.
Okay, so just on the last slide, well, let's start here. So on this side, I just want to add and get your input on what about because I've had people that just send me just a bunch of Cash App incoming deposits, but there's no story behind it. So you're not technically focusing on source of income, but how do you handle that situation appropriately when there's no story?
Yeah, I mean, look, if the person does not have, and those folks don't have a voucher, right? They're not using a voucher.
Yeah, no, they may or may not, but this is just to speak on the application employment, just says self-employed, and then a bunch of random deposits. How do you not,
Listen, this is a unilateral and independent business decision, but it's income, right? And so source of income discrimination is different than being able to prove that you have income enough to pay the rent, right? If somebody has income each month and you can tally it up in that Cash App, you're self-employed, right? And it's, 3, 4, 5 times what the rent is,
They have,
why
yeah,
say no, right? Like, what's the
yeah,
reason? What would be the reason for saying no? And if that reason is legitimate, non-discriminatory, right, doesn't have an impact on a protected class, right? If every single one of the people who was sending you those Cash App ledgers or whatever they're called, right?
mm-hmm,
If every single one of those people is a Black woman, right?
mm-hmm.
And you're not accepting those tenants, you're probably going to have a problem, because that policy of yours is only impacting a protected class, right? Race.
I like it.
So take a close look at your policies. And one of the themes of what we'll talk about today is going to keep coming back to screen. How you screen is king. And it's really critical to screen tenants properly to avoid liability.
Right. And then just my take on that is what you want to focus on is what are your screening rules. So if I'm saying I need 3 months of income and you provide me 3 months of income, it's enough and it's consistent. The thing is, some people may want to give them problems just because it's not what they're used to seeing. So don't overthink it as long as it checks your boxes. Just focus on your boxes. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're going to veer from those boxes, there better be a legitimate business, non-discriminatory reason, and your written policies had better account for that, right? Because you start veering away from your policies, that's also a problem. We'll talk about that too.
It just hit me. You can't care about their source of income. That it all comes together. Wow. That literally just hit me. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there are some localities that do talk about it has to be lawful source of income. And so, look, I mean, yeah, technically, could you be like, well, if I know that is from, selling
Whatever.
here on the street, right?
Mhm.
I mean, like, how are you going to prove that? What are you going to do? Like,
That's an accusation you have to come up with. And then, yeah, so just, did you show proof of income?
yeah,
This was a good slide. Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Okay.
And to bring it all together, right? Like, source of income discrimination. Real estate agents are exposed to liability if they are working with a landlord who says, I do not want Section 8. I mean, listen, I'll tell you, I have sued landlords in a former life. I have sued landlords on behalf of my former clients who were Section 8 voucher holders because they said awful and wrote awful things, right? Like, we will not rent to a Section 8 cockroach anymore. We will not. Yeah, I mean, just rotten, right? Like, rotten. And that's exactly what the ordinances were designed to protect against, is that type of discrimination. And so if you're working, and we get this question all the time, our members are like, yeah, I don't care. I think it's, use your voucher. I want to get you in, I want to rent this unit for my owner, but my owner is the one. Guess what? They will drag you down. This is like, just straight up mom advice, right? Not even legal advice, right? Like, the people you associate with will drag you down. And so and here, like, there is a legal implication, right? The law very clearly says, our local laws in Miami-Dade County say that this liability extends to real estate agents, right? Source of income discrimination. So if you are facilitating a deal where your owner is sifting out the Section 8 voucher holder application, if you are writing things in the MLS, no Section 8, and that's syndicated to third-party sites where anybody can see it, you will get dinged. You will get sued. If you are resharing Facebook posts, right? Like, if you are on Facebook resharing, of course, everybody has permission to do so. All the appropriate boxes are checked, right? You're sharing somebody's listing. And that listing, not even your listing, right? But you're like, wow, look at all the rentals available in Miami Beach right now. Look at some of these great rentals. And you reshare a listing that's not even yours, and it has discriminatory language in it, like no Section 8, no kids, or insert here, whatever is a problem. You could be dragged into that too. So make sure that you are you're paying close attention to what you're sharing, resharing, and what you're writing. And I'll tell you that the MLS has since implemented We regularly review the keywords that are flagged automatically by the AI machines in your listings. We run those every single day, and there are automatic eye check violations that go out, and notices that go out to fix listings, especially those with fair housing violations.
Yeah, and just real quick, not to hold us on this slide, but
Yeah.
there's also a flip side to that. There are owners out there that'll just say, I want you to rent it to Section 8. Like, that's still classifying an income source, or if I'm not mistaken. Like, how would you go about that if you have an owner that says, I want Section 8, don't rent anyone else that's not Section? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So right there, the local ordinances do not contemplate, right, like reverse discrimination, right? Not a thing. And so if it's a protected class, and of course that protected class has to be one recognized by law, and you are discriminating against them, yeah, there could possibly be a claim there. But more importantly is the screening process, right? And if you are working with an owner that says, this is all I want to do, look, there's a way to, navigate that. You can post it on certain sites. Yes, we will make sure that target market knows that this unit is available. But also you have a conversation with the owner, which is, hey, look, we're not going to arbitrarily just say people can't apply. We are going to accept all applications. We'll look at all qualified tenants. And from there, you can make a fully informed decision about what it is you want to accept. But what we're not going to do is start with some sort of predisposed, like to start knowing your decision has already been made. Don't do that. Don't ever do that in tenant screening.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. And so we've got questions around before we move on, right? We've got a couple of questions. One is, what if the source of income is from a voucher holder where the bedroom count does not match the unit bedroom count, and the landlord is concerned about the future ability to increase rents to fair market or payment standard levels, right? And they're not willing to accept the voucher despite the range being within the range. Well, you can't make decisions. I mean, Khalid, you can jump in.
Yeah, I
Can't
got
make.
you.
Yeah, I mean, look, like you shouldn't be making decisions. Your owners should not be making decisions based on what their crystal ball might show for the future, right? Like it's
Yeah.
current time, right? Like at this time, is that person qualified to rent? And the answer based on the example that our attendee, our member gave is yeah, they are currently qualified to rent. It's concerns about future ability to pay. Well, riddle me this, right? Like, are you doing that with all tenants, right? Like, what if a tenant loses their job, right? Somebody who doesn't have a Section 8 voucher. What if somebody moves out? What if the roommate moves out? What if the roof flies off in a tornado and you need to raise the rent because, you got to replace the roof and there are expenses? What if the person, becomes, their salary is cut? Like all of those, frankly, like made up future scenarios that are not grounded in reality are really triggers for discrimination claims.
You gotta be careful. And then the deep thing I pull from this is when you say the bedroom count doesn't match. So it sounds like the voucher says one bedroom count, but so you're gonna get a few things, and it sounds like they showed you one of the other. In some housing authorities, they're gonna give you that paper that says you can get this much for this many bedrooms in these zip codes if this stuff's included. There's another document which is gonna be the voucher itself, if I'm not mistaken, and that's gonna say your name is dedicated, well, I don't know the word I want to use here, allocated this many bedrooms for this much. So yes, they're going to give you that whole paper, but they're giving everyone that paper. So don't just look at the paper, especially the monthly rents on there, because that's not going to be necessarily how much they pay. So verify you have all pages from the voucher and can see the date, the signature of the caseworker, and how many bedrooms they're actually entitled to, because even if it's in budget, they're not just going to let them get extra bedrooms because they have a lot of families to pay for.
Yeah, and look, this scenario, I've seen this scenario come up before where a tenant had a voucher for a studio apartment, right? But they could afford, based on the amount and what was in the market, they could afford a one bedroom, right? They could move into a one bedroom. That's okay, right? Like you can go up in bedrooms, you can't go down as long as it's within your price range. So that's okay. But what you can't do is like make up some reason like, well, in the future, maybe they can't afford it, right? Like, are
Yeah.
you doing it with everybody? Probably not, right? So
You would need
it
approval. I would say
yeah,
talk to the caseworker on that. I like this second question with the HOA because I know you would
yeah.
touch on that one very well.
Go
To
ahead.
accept, you want me to read? I'm gonna read it for you. I got you.
Question. Yeah, yeah,
To
read the
accept
question.
to accept Section 8, the property has to be registered with the city where it's located. Also, the HOA rules, if they approve this Section 8, I inquired with some associations and they don't allow this. So they can't necessarily just not allow Section 8. This isn't legal advice. And as far as being registered, the owner has the ability to go onto the county websites or the housing authorities websites and register or do their vendor application up front, but it's not a requirement. The tenant can find the property and bring it to the housing authority's attention for that paperwork to be set up. It does take a little longer, but if you're an owner and you just want to rent your property, you don't necessarily have to do that in advance to work with housing.
Yeah, and that is that's a discriminatory policy, and it drives me nuts when HOAs and condo associations have these policies in place, because oftentimes, the policy is in place, the tenant's trying to get in, the owner is not the one, and the real estate agent, right? They're not the problem, right? The problem is the association, right? And so now you've got the association discriminating, and it's like, what are you going to do, right? If you're working, what I would recommend is that you refer your customers to Hope Fair Housing or Legal Services of Greater Miami so that they can take up recourse with the association, right? Legal recourse. But what, the problem is the justice is really slow sometimes. And then, like, from a practical perspective, after you've sued the association, you really want to live there. I I mean, some people do, right? Some people do, but it's tough. It's tough, right? And so, and just practically speaking, it's often not fast enough. You need to get housed right away. Lawsuits can take years. That said, would highly encourage you to, if you're seeing associations that have problematic policies like this, email us legal@miami@re.com. Reach out to Hope Fair Housing, reach out to Legal Services of Greater Miami. They regularly test these types of cases. They are professionals. They are excellent at what they do. And they are often able to, once they start seeing patterns, you may think, oh, well, I'll report it and who knows what happens. But when they start to see patterns, they look into it. So you never know where it'll go. So just report.
A pro tip is I don't call around asking, do you take Section 8? Because I should know the answer. Everyone is going to let everyone apply. So what I do in cases of associations, I just want to see their bylaws. So ask to see what are your approval requirements, and you read that yourself and see what in there might be an issue for your client. Because if they have a credit score minimum and they're saying we don't take Section 8 because of that, there's a good amount of people on Section 8 with very good credit. So you have to let them apply. Let everyone
Yeah.
apply.
Yeah. So, there's a question about what, to repeat what we just went over, right? And the short recap is, look, if you as the agent and the owner are doing the right thing when it comes to an HOA or a condo association, and you're like, yeah, great, come one, come all, Section 8, otherwise, we'll accept all applications, no problem. And the HOA or the condo association is saying, no, we don't accept it. And what Khalid is saying is brilliant, right? Check the bylaws, check the governing docs. You can often get a hold of these ahead of time. There's in Miami-Dade County, at least, there's the registry, the condo registry, where condo associations are required to post their governing docs. You can go on there and pull it. Take a look ahead of time to see what they do or don't accept, right? And if you're working with a customer who is a tenant, right, you're going to want to have a conversation with them to, mitigate your liability, right? Which is, look, this is what I found. We can move forward with it. It's not me, it's them. And, lay out what their recourses are if you run into those walls. But bottom line is, condos and HOAs cannot be discriminating against Section 8 source of income or other protected classes, right? So if that happens to one of your customers who is a buyer, if you have an owner, right, who is frustrated, go to Legal Services, go to Hope Fair Housing, report it, because it's a problem.
I can try to
All
clear
right.
this up for you.
Yeah.
So what we're saying here, so yes, if there's tenant, okay, so this was in the chat conversation. Does the property
Oh, right.
need to be vacant in order to be rented? It does
Yeah.
need to be vacant to inspect. It must be move-in ready. But you can have tenants in place and still market your property for rent and find tenants using Section 8 and start the process, especially if they're, say, a few months before the current tenants move out. This is an ideal situation. You can start doing the vendor application, the process, and everything. The only thing is they're not going to send their inspector out, which is one of the last steps, until those tenants are moved out, the property's cleaned up, fixed up, and move-in ready again. So that's you're just pushing back inspection.
Yep. And I got a question to me on the side in the chat, which is the how do you know how many folks are moving into the property with if they're using a Section 8 voucher? Well, it's no different than if you are renting to anybody not using a voucher, right? And again, the thing that I would encourage you to do is to have a little self-reflection about why you are concerned about this and whether you are concerned about it for all of the tenants in all of the properties that with which you are working with owners, right? Are you counting tenants in the household for people who are not using a voucher? If not, then you're going to get dinged for discrimination, right? And on its face, right? Like if you are uniformly making sure that the place is not overcrowded, that is okay. That is a valid concern, right? With legitimate underlying business purposes, but you need to make sure that your policies are uniform.
I can touch on. Do you want me to keep going through questions like this, or you want me to wait? You take.
Let's take a pause because we're at a good
Okay.
break. And then the question about
I like that.
Yeah, the question on on inspections, also want to flag that you should go and watch the first part of this earlier in the month. Kevin, is that on YouTube?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Kevin says so. So it is. And
I'll
so the
post the
first
link.
part,
I'll post the link
thank
in the chat.
you. Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. So the first part of it's on our YouTube, and Khalid really goes into detail on the inspection process. So we're not going to get too deep into it today because we want to get to the other pieces, but make sure you are checking that out. All right, as promised, protected classes. All right, so this is a chart of the counties in our general area, right? And it also I pull into that fair housing parfait, right? You've got the Federal Fair Housing Act, Florida Fair Housing Act, and then you've got the counties around us. And you'll see that, federal has a much shorter list than even the state. The state are about the same, more or less the same. But then you've got the rest of the county added protected classes, which are quite extensive. So make sure you know what your protected classes are when you are working in landlord-tenant land. All right. What everybody may or may not want to know. All right. Look, how not to get sued for Section 8 or anything else related to fair housing. The biggest takeaway from today is make sure you have a tenant screening process set up in writing and that it's uniform. We'll talk about the screening in a moment, right? But that is the biggest takeaway for today. Make sure you are screening properly. You need to know what's going into your listings, right? If you're a broker and you're working with agents and your agents are putting stuff into the MLS, make sure that you know what's in there, that you are training them on things to put or not put, right? I have seen lawsuits based on and demand letters based on things like, this is great for families. And on its face, it's like, oh, how nice, it's great for families. Well, who are you excluding, right? Familial status, it's a protected class. Maybe you won't rent to students is the implication. Single students, right? Same thing for, I've even seen demand letters on the other end, right? Like great for students, which means that you won't rent to a family. Or, be mindful about things like it's walkable. Well, what if somebody has a disability and cannot walk? Same thing for grade schools. Do not put that, right? And look, folks are like, well, but I want to show that I know the neighborhood and I want to make sure that I'm an expert. Well, you can do that by pointing your customers to the right resources that are not tinged with inherently kind of biased data, right? Like what makes great schools? If you're looking at school systems that have been historically disenfranchised, if you're looking at certain schools within school systems that have been historically disenfranchised, well, that's a problem, right? Because who is that impacting? It's probably having a disparate impact on a protected class, race, right? So you want to make sure that you are not pointing people to great schools, walkable. And what can you do
Great blank
instead?
community.
Point them to the resources, right? There's all the school websites that you can go to that look at how schools are rated, right? Based on certain criteria. Miami-Dade County Schools rates their schools. Send them to those websites, right? Send them to those resources, those neutral, more neutral resources that are not you, that are not dragging you down in liability. Don't go there, right? Make sure, and oh my goodness, if you have not seen Long Island Divided, it's a short documentary on Newsweek. If you have not seen it, I highly encourage you to see it. In New York, Long Island, there was an investigation, right? And New York is not like Florida. We have the Florida Wiretapping Act, where you can't record somebody without their consent. In New York City, in New York State, you can. You can record people. So they had the, hidden cameras in their like jackets and things like that. And it's horrific. It's really horrific what some agents were telling folks. And look, our members are, and not to malign anybody else's membership, but our members are awesome, right? And you all are always coming to us for the resources to make sure you're doing the right thing and that you're following the laws and all of that. But oh my goodness, go watch that, because some of the stuff was just harrowing. Next, that goes into training your agents on fair housing. You're here today, we're preaching to the choir, but make sure that your agents are here, they're getting trained. Or, Fair Haven 2.0 just launched. Khalid sent that to us right before the webinar today. That launched. NAR is requiring fair housing training now. So I guess I should have put that in there, that, you're going to have to train them on fair housing anyway. So make sure they get that. Again, be careful advertising other listings on social media. Because look, even if it wasn't and the same thing with IDX feeds, right? Like if you see something on an IDX feed and it's not your listing and it doesn't smell right, report it to the MLS, because that exposes you to liability. If you've got a listing with a fair housing violation that's coming across your page, I've seen that happen too. Don't get caught up in that. And likewise, don't ignore our takedown alerts. Like respond to those real quick. Khalid, jump in.
Yeah, so one thing to add on that is, so merging a chat question with where we are, someone asked, what if there's an extra person that's not on the voucher? So this can go a couple of ways. This could conceivably be like a defrauding the government situation, because the way these housing authorities work is sometimes the voucher is based on your household size and your household income. So if the person they're not including because they make too much money and it will cause them to lose their voucher, well, you're making the story up to get money from the government. And if you, the agent, are showing them the property and you see this additional person and they tell you, no, don't put them on because they'll take our voucher, well, now you're part of it, so that's when you got to be careful. But just the same, it could not be that, and it could be a background situation, but still it all goes around to, you probably want to report the situation realistically. But it's all in your screening. Be clear. Everyone over 18 needs to submit an application. This, whatever your process is, have it outlined and clear and upfront.
Yeah, and look, if you're in that situation where there's the term of art is unauthorized boarder, if there is an unauthorized, it sounds like a pirate ship or something, but anyway, if you have an unauthorized boarder living in the property that your owner is renting, the first step is to send a 7-day, depends on the number of days. If it's private,
15-day notice to cure.
Yeah. If it's private, no Section 8, 7-day. But if it is Section 8, you're going to have to give more time. You need to look at the lease. You need to look at the rules and regulations, because if you don't do that right, you'll get kicked out of court. But you need to give a notice to cure. You give them the opportunity to move that person out, right? And that is the first step in the process to removing that person. And just be mindful, ask questions before you do stuff like that, because look, the person, you could run into fair housing discrimination claims there, because
just assuming it.
right, you're assuming that it's an unauthorized boarder. You don't know. But also that person could be a live-in aide, and that live-in aide doesn't always count toward household counts. And a live-in aide for, you know, somebody who has a disability, or the person who is like a caregiver who is coming during the day to take care of an elderly person, right? So you want to make sure that you are asking questions first before taking action, because
And
it might
if I
have,
may,
jump in.
so just real quick, and also there's a way to go about it. I'm not saying go right on and just report. What I'm saying is just make sure everything is clearly documented. If they're asking you to have inaccurate documentation is when there's an issue. So if an association finds out someone's living in a condo or property they're not supposed to be, they're going to send us and saying this person needs to apply and be approved to live here. Can they still live here? Just the same, the extra person who may not be on the voucher, make sure they're on the lease and documentation, because when it goes back to housing, now housing is going to come back and ask them, who's this person? And let them figure it out. You did your part.
Yeah, exactly. And you can backstop that with, you know, if you did a notice to cure, you had conversations, emails, texts, whatever the case might be. So very good point. All right. This is the new toolkit, and I will, when I stop sharing my screen, I will drop it into the chat. I will attach it as an attachment. But the thing here to remember is that, look, this is an outline of a tenant screening checklist, brand new, hot off the presses this afternoon. And I'll run through it really quickly. It's going to live on miamirealtors.com/legal updates. And look, this is what we've been talking about. Number one, right? Like, create a written policy and tenant screening procedures. And there are lots of sub points here. So, you know, what to include in the policy, make sure it's in writing, give it to all your agents, have your agents sign that they got it, right? And make sure it's not having a disparate impact on any protected classes. It is okay. Folks get, you know, a little, you know, they short circuit a little when they're like, I can't ask anything, right? Yes, you can ask about certain things when you are looking to rent to somebody. And honestly, you have an obligation to ask about certain things if you're a landlord owner, right? Because if you're not, for example, if you're not ensuring that you have a safe property, you know, if you rent to somebody who has, you know, is a convicted felon, as, you know, murdered the past 3 neighbors they've lived next to, that's probably a good reason to deny their application. And so the thing is, the secret sauce is make sure that you have that written policy and tenant screening procedures. So what can you ask about? Pets, of course, who will live in the unit, income, employment, credit report, eviction history. You can ask about those things. Remember, you also want to make sure that you have a document retention policy to ensure that you are keeping applications for the required amount of time. Because if you are faced with a, you know, fair housing claim, you're probably going to have to produce that, and stuff that's beyond that document retention policy period, you don't. You're going to want to send adverse action letters specifying reasons for rejections, and you need to make sure that that's in line with the Fair Credit Reporting Act requirements. And look, you can have a policy, which is great. You should be in writing, but you got to walk the walk. You got to talk the talk and walk the walk. It's not enough to just to have a policy. You have to make sure that your agents and your offices are following it. And of course, just make sure that every now and then you're giving it a review for compliance. Special considerations for condo associations. If you are working with condos, just make sure that you know, can condos screen? A lot of condos do screen, meaning their boards or some of it they hire, but it's not always done legally. And so what do I mean by that? Well, that's why the answer here is maybe. Can condos screen? Maybe. They can screen if they have established tenant screening procedures in their governing documents. If they have not, then no. And what does that mean? The bylaws, you know, they can include reasonable restrictions concerning the use, occupancy, and transfer of units, right? All good. But they must also grant the board authority to approve or deny tenants. So what does that all mean? Look, make sure that it's in the governing documents that the board can screen or their designees, right? And then make sure that there are uniform screening policies that are actually followed. Next, jump in.
A quick thing to note on this topic is some of these condo boards or even homeowner association boards are just comprised of a few people that live in the community and are meeting once a month or something like that and just looking at all these screening results and issuing a response. They're not real estate professionals or holding any licensing in some cases. So you have to see where you gotta know what you're talking about so you can know when to counter and push back and when to say, okay, you got us, you know?
That's exactly right. Yep. The other thing, the other hot topic I get all the time is criminal records and credit reports. I always get, is it legal to deny, based on somebody's criminal records? And the short answer is maybe. It depends. And look, if you're going to look at criminal records, and honestly, it is okay to do that. Even the government looks at criminal records when they're admitting or denying people into public housing or Section 8, the Section 8 program. They look at criminal records. And so why would you look at that? Well, again, landlords have an obligation to ensure safety in their community. There are also, registered sex offender laws on the books where it may not, like that person may not be able to live in a particular place given the proximity to a school or where children congregate, right? So other people in the complex could sue that landlord for their failure to comply with those laws. So it depends, right? And then if you're going to, make sure you look at the criminal records last, right? We call these safety valves where you're looking at everything else, right? Everything else compared, like income, pets, who's living in the unit, employment, eviction history. The last thing you look at is the criminal history. Why? Because we call it a safety valve, right? Because all other things equal, right? Look at everything else first so that there is no allegation that you saw right off the bat and denied them. Make sure you're, jump in.
A really quick practitioner tip is when looking at background, be careful not to just have or suggest your owner deny an application because of just an arrest. You want to look for convictions because Florida, you're innocent until proven guilty. So you can't evict innocent people. And for me, my screening process is we look for felony convictions. If it's you'd be surprised when people out here getting arrested. So felony convictions are very different from misdemeanor convictions or even just arrests. So
that's exactly right.
And do not ever make it your duty to tell anyone yes or no, because people will call you on the phone and say, hey, I just got out of prison doing 20 years for murder. I see your place. Can I apply? Like, don't let everyone apply. Like, if I call the bank and I know I have horrible credit, if I want a black card, they're not going to tell me no on the phone. They're going to say, let's try it,
That's exactly right. Look at, again, convictions, not arrests. It's a unilateral and independent business decision, whether you're looking at felonies or if you're looking at misdemeanors or a pattern of behavior within a certain period of time, right? And so you're going to want to make sure that, again, the look back period is reasonable, right? If you're looking back 50 years, like if somebody stole a candy bar from the corner store 50 years ago, like if that's the only
different. A lot
right, so that you could be looking down the line at a fair housing lawsuit if you have sort of arbitrary or unreasonable guidelines around criminal records. And you're also going to want to consider mitigating factors, right? Like how long has it been? What type of crime was it? Consider what was going on in their life. Have they since reformed? Are they a model citizen? Have they had no evictions? Think about those things when you are screening. And then one thing you should not have is a blanket ban. This will get you sued in, 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. If you're just like, no criminal history, that will get you sued. That will get you sued because that is a discriminatory practice. Now, some of you might remember the HUD, the 2016 HUD memo that goes into criminal histories and how bans on housing, moving into housing or getting kicked out of it is discriminatory. That HUD memo, it's a 2016 HUD memo, and that is always relied upon in fair housing lawsuits for criminal records. And so make sure that you are not on the receiving end of that. And honestly, a lot of these lawsuits start based on what Khalid said, which is if somebody picks up the phone, they're like, I don't care what it is, right? Like I just got out of jail, whatever, but it wasn't that bad. Like, don't say no. Invite them to apply. Invite them to apply, always. We get the same question on credit reports, which are, or credit scores, right? Which is, a condo or an owner will say, well, you can't have below X credit score. Is that legal? Well, a credit score is not a protected class, but who it's impacting could be a protected class. If it is disparately impacting people of color or any other protected class, then yeah, it could potentially be discriminate. It could have a discriminatory impact. Now, I heard this from actually somebody who I used to litigate against all the time, an opposing counsel who used to evict people. I would defend folks to keep them in their housing. And he told me, look, he himself, who represents landlords, he was like, listen, I tell my clients all the time, forget the credit score, right? Why? Because a credit report is not an accurate or reliable indicator of a tenant's ability to pay rent or their eviction history. If you've got somebody with a low credit score, yet and because they haven't paid their credit card bills, but they've never once been evicted, what does that tell you? It tells you that they're prioritizing paying their rent over their credit card. And as a landlord, like, sorry, not sorry to say, like, do you care about their credit card? Not really, right? You want to make sure that they are able to pay their rent. So think carefully about credit scores. That is something that is has not been litigated, but I would not be surprised if it is. And look, again, best practice, consider a holistic review of all other factors instead, and don't require arbitrary credit scores or income amounts. And I see the note in the chat about HOAs rejecting applicants that have a history of evictions, collections, and or charge-offs. So if it's an HOA or if it's a condo, right? If it's a condo association, the first thing you need to look at is if condos even have the ability and permission under their governing documents to do tenant screening. If they have not given themselves that authority to do that, they cannot make that decision, full stop. Second thing, the second thing is if they have given themselves the authority to do that in writing, not just somebody saying so, they can include reasonable restrictions, again, on the use, occupancy, and transfer of units. That includes rentals. So generally speaking, right, evictions, yeah, that would relate to the ability of a potential tenant to rent or, to comply with their obligations. But just because an eviction was filed doesn't mean that you should hold it against somebody. They could have settled. There could have been underlying issues why they were withholding rent. It could have been a landlord who wasn't fixing something. Like, you don't know. Don't make a decision just based on the fact that an eviction was filed. You want to look for judgments. Same thing with collections and charge-offs. It goes back to exactly what I was just saying. Khalid, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I did, but I started reading this question. But long story short, another thing to think about is with application fees. You can't have a different application fee if it's using housing because it's extra steps and things like it. That is a change for a specific income source. You can't do that. Not what I wanted to say, but that's just something to fill the space while I read this question here.
Yeah.
Is it the bylaws we're talking about?
Wait, for condos? Yeah.
Yeah, he wants to know where he can look to find out if the association has the ability to deny.
Yeah, you'll want to look at the declaration or the bylaws or both.
Yes.
And if, so look there, they might have some resolutions, maybe not. And then Khalid, jumping back to a question about like, hey, does the government provide vouchers to people who have quote unquote these same issues, right? So we're talking about credit scores, evictions, criminal histories, and the answer is yes. The government does, because the government doesn't give itself permission to discriminate against people. They have policies in place that, prohibit that. And so having those kinds of blanket bans and things like that, that would be discriminatory.
Another thing to consider, one more thing to consider is oftentimes people just got their voucher. So you have to consider if there's a recent eviction, maybe they were having hardship all this time because there's a waiting list in some housing authorities and they finally got their voucher, working it all out. But so what do you have to consider all of that and review the entire application process? And that's why I tell everyone, all applications are considered. We review the whole application. Whatever you tell me, you just got out of prison, no problem, sir. We're going to look at your income too and everything. I don't have, like it all comes into play. So have that consistency. One more thing.
Yeah. And also,
perfect.
In terms of background checks, owners do have to do their own tenant screening. Section 8 is not going to do the tenant screening for you and picking your tenant. There is a whole separate application process to even get into the program. And part of that is absolutely a background check. And part of it's what's called the annual recertifications. In those annual research, Section 8 is, looking at income, it's looking at family composition, it's looking at criminal history. They look at all these things. And folks do, unfortunately, folks do lose their vouchers or their public housing sometimes because of criminal cases, depending on what they are.
That's also the source of a common issue and misconception people have. Just because housing did whatever screening they did, they're not going to report that to you, the owner. That's for them. You have to do your own screening. So owners will often assume just because they have a voucher, they're qualified to rent this property. Still do your screening and make sure because if you don't screen, and on the note of extra people, that's property management. You want to check in on the properties. Like, it's in the lease that you can do, make sure it's okay. Just give notice. That's
yes. And moving on to some other, another point under the last point on criminal records and credit reports, credit scores. There could be times when the policy on criminal records, to be honest, will have a discriminatory and disparate impact on a protected class, right? If you are saying as an owner that, you make a decision, no, we are not going to rent to somebody, my example of the person who killed the past 3 neighbors and were convicted of it, right? Yeah, that they might be part of a protected class. Maybe they're elderly, insert here, whatever protected class, right? But the thing that you have to look at, right? Make sure that the policy is justified and necessary to achieve substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory interest, right? And that there are no alternatives. Is there anything else you could do? Well, not really. My unfortunate example, they did what they did. And well, if they've shown a pattern and it's something so serious, right? And you already have this obligation as a landlord to make sure everybody else in the property has, some level of security, and you could have prevented this from happening again in your complex, yeah, that is probably a very clear reason why you would deny that person's application. Of course, it's probably never going to be that cut and dry. It's going to be an analysis that you have to engage in, which is when we would tell you, jump to the end of this checklist and go lawyer up before somebody else does, to make sure that you are on good footing. Something that we get all the time, Khalid, in recent times, mostly because the county's website has not been updated yet, which is that a lot of folks are reaching out to us like, hey, do we still have to do that notice of tenants' rights to tenants in Miami-Dade County? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is that was a local ordinance, and that was preempted by HB 1417 in 2023, a couple of years ago now. So long story short, don't forget that effective July 1, 2023, there is no requirement to use this notice of tenants' rights, and everything reverts back to Chapter 83, Part 2, Florida statutes, which is the Florida Landlord Tenant Act, and whatever you have in your lease, right? So keep that in mind. And even so, even if that doesn't apply anymore, it doesn't matter. Fair housing laws still do apply. And when in doubt, of course, call your attorneys.
For where we got a tenant. How do you screen tenants? We at Miami Realtors, we like Rent Spree. It's on your Miami dashboard at MiamiRE.com.
We do have that, and we have some other products on there as well that you can use to screen tenants. Absolutely.
I like Rent Spree personally.
Okay.
There are others that are just as good, and you should try them all to see what you like best.
In line with
independent and unilateral business decision I have made to use Rent Spree.
Yes. Yes.
I'm studying.
So yeah, that's look, there's tons of programs you can use, but those programs, but Rent Spree is, or any of them, right? Any of these tenant screening programs are not going to find the tenants for you. They're not on the phones, taking the calls up front, from folks. They're not the ones putting the listing in the MLS. So you still have a lot of legwork to do. They come in toward the middle of the process, I would say. So make sure that you still have written policies, right? And if it is your written policy to use one of these third-party services, and that's your practice, put it in writing. Put it in writing. Why? Because it's a CY everything that you are using these third-party services to provide information to your owners. All right. That is that is just about time. And
We
let me
finished on time. You know,
I
we've never
cannot-
finished on time ever.
I know.
This is crazy.
I know. Well-oiled machine. This page, it just has some additional resources for you. Some of the resources that we get asked for all the time, we put them on one page. Khalid has dropped some of them in the chat as we've gone along. Screenshot it or not. Kevin will be sending out the slides. And as always, if you have any questions, reach out to Ask Legal or at legal@miamire.com. We are happy to, we can't give legal advice or representation here at the association since we represent the association, but we are happy to orient you to where you need to go to get the information you need. Thank you again for attending today. Khalid, anything else? And thank you, Khalid, for again, and Kevin for hosting this, for getting it together and continuing to do this each year.
One quick question. Last I checked, this was like a year ago. I think I did a screening in Miami-Dade and I couldn't see the eviction records. Is that no longer a thing? Like, what do we, did that change?
No, HB 1417 preempted that.
Oh, that's like it, you can check now.
Yeah.
Interesting. Stay in the know. Oh, I emailed legal@miamire.com a real estate question for things I can and can't do. So send all your legal questions to legal@miamire.com.
Yes, here we are.
Please respond at your nearest convenience.
Anything else, Kevin or Khalid?
Oh, that's about it. Thank you for doing this in every year. We'll definitely have this series back. It's always one of our most popular classes that we put on. And the only other thing is if you haven't gotten your tickets yet for F1, we still have them available. We are going to be in the Beach Grandstands area. So if you want to celebrate Realtors Day with Miami Realtors, there you go, Khalid. I might need a picture of that for a promo I'm doing. I'll hit you up about that later.
I'll bring you one. I got you.
Well, no, I just need a picture of it and I'll Photoshop the rest later. But
I'll take the picture for you.
Promos. But yeah, send me one. Can you send me one up looking down and then one on a side profile? That'd be great. But yeah, we'll see you there. We're gonna have a few sponsors. We're gonna have a great time. Realtor Day is going to be quite the experience. I can't wait to see how it all shakes out. This is the first time we're all doing this. So we'll see you Friday. If not, we have more amazing classes for you coming up, and I'll send you all that information when I send you the recording of this class.
Love it. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm going to be on my laptop.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I have a full purse.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm eating before I leave.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm sneaking out for shopping.
We're YPN leaders.
Of course we're going to be creating content.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm signing up for classes.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm Cafecito obsessed.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm going to crash the next happy hour.
If I'm on my way home, yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still amaze me? If I'm on my way home, yeah. If I'm on my way home, yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, don't you still remember?